some, male, female, black, white, those are accidental distinctions. We come to the agreement that that doesn't make people essentially different. Now, we can't really, as I said before, we can't really use the soul as an argument today because that's part of a religious belief. So on a private level, yes, you could say, well, I believe there is a soul. But for an open philosophical debate, you couldn't use that as an argument. So if you remove the soul, it seems to me that we are left with nothing truly essential that is different in humans and animals, or from humans to animals. Because we're left with the fact that the evolutionary process led to different variations within species, so that certain species developed large claws, others developed thick fur, others developed long necks as ways of coping with the environment, and we humans developed reason. I mean, if you take religion and the soul off the picture, then what we call the soul, the mind, the human mind, is just one more natural development of the evolutionary process, in which case it's hard for us to make an essential distinction between humans and animals, because even language doesn't really represent anything truly essentially different, no more than long claws or thick fur would. Okay? You see what I mean? So that's where we start with the direct duty views. People who support the direct duty views say there is no essential distinction. It's just accidental. The difference between humans, especially between some humans, the moral patients, the marginal cases, people who can't think or reason or use language because of a deep mental handicap or because they're in a coma, the difference between those individuals and some animals, at least, the higher mammals, say cats and dogs, they say, well, what is the difference? Cats and dogs and horses may be more functional, more communicative than humans. So there is no difference. So why don't those animals have rights too? This is how the debate is presented from the direct duty view perspective. Okay? Let me start with Jeremy Bentham, a British philosopher of the 18th century. Jeremy Bentham was what we call a utilitarian philosopher. We talked about utilitarianism, back at the beginning of the semester. For a utilitarian philosopher, the idea is that we all pursue pleasure in very general terms, like happiness, and that's called utility, and try to avoid pain. And we have that in common with animals. And that's what characterizes life on Earth. So let me read from Jeremy Bentham. For Jeremy Bentham, it is not language that makes the inseparable line, inseparable separation between humans and animals. There is no inseparable line. He says, the day may come when the rest of the animal creation may acquire those rights which never could have been withholden from them but by the hand of tyranny. What is it that should trace the inseparable line? Is it the faculty of reason, the capacity to reason? Is that the radical, inseparable, essential difference? Or perhaps the capacity to speak? But a full-grown horse or dog is beyond comparison a more rational as well as more conversational animal than an infant or of a day or a week or even a month old. But suppose they were otherwise. Suppose that's not the case. The question, what would it avail? The question is not, can they reason, nor can they talk, but can they suffer? So, since animals can suffer, then Jeremy Bentham thinks animals have rights too. Okay? Now, there are problems with this position. We don't need to get into that. This is just a very general survey of the topic. But of course, if suffering is all that matters, it would seem that as long as you anesthetize the animal, it doesn't know it's going to be killed, then you can kill them. Okay? And in fact, that line of argument has proceeded, and so that's why we try to be really humane when killing chicken and killing animals today, because, well, we try to make it less painful or not painful at all. And so that utilitarian line of reasoning has led to somehow a justification of killing animals without pain. Okay? Now, let's now talk about Singer, Peter Singer. Now, Peter Singer is an Australian philosopher and activist. He's really the founder, you could say, of the animal rights movement as far as activism, social activism is concerned. He's a philosopher too, as I said, and he's the author of one of the founding works in the 1970s, which is Animal Liberation, which is really as much of a philosophy book as a call for action, okay? Animal liberation. He coined the word speciesism. Speciesism. Let me write that down on the board for you. Speciesism, which is akin to racism. Why speciesism? Well, why do we discriminate by species? He says it's as arbitrary as discriminating by race. The difference between humans and other animals is just a difference of body shape. It's not an essential difference. Okay? Now, he's very radical, as I said. He basically proposes to place animals and humans on the same level, and when it comes to medical experimentation, that definitely poses some serious problems, some serious moral issues. Now he teaches at Princeton University, and when he was hired at Princeton, there were protests in the streets and everything. Now I met Peter Singer once here at LAX. A friend of mine who is a journalist from Spain was interviewing him for some kind of article, story he was preparing. And he invited me to the interview because he knew I deal with animal rights. So I was expecting to see this really radical activist, absolutely radical, you know, like, and of course a question that couldn't be lacking from the interview was, well, what do you think of bullfighting, you know, being from Spain? Now, let me tell you, many people in Spain oppose bullfighting. There's a strong movement against bullfighting. Even one of the regional parliaments in Spain is now debating whether to abolish bullfighting completely in Barcelona and this Catalonia area. And then, to my surprise, he goes, well, you know, some things are traditions that maybe ought to be respected. And I mean, the guy thought, well, these two guys are from Spain. I better not upset them, you know. Like, and I go, what? This is the radical animal rights activist, and he's telling me that bullfighting should be respected because, you know, it's traditions, it's culture. And I mean, that completely, to me, that did it, okay? So anyway, that's, yes, Jason?
Bullfighting refers to the guy who has
I don't know how it's called in English, a cape. The cape, and then they kill, then they kill the bull, and the bull gets killed. I'm sorry. Matador. Well, it's a complex thing. There's the one that does this to the bull, then the one that kills the bull. It's a very complex issue. This isn't just one figure. Yeah, Matador would be the one that ends killing the bull. I suppose. I'm not very knowledgeable about bullfighting. I oppose bullfighting myself. So. I've been to a bullfighting ring a couple of times in my life. Once I was taken when I was a child, and I hated it, so I didn't want to come back there. Okay? And the majority of people in Spain don't care much about bullfighting. It's kind of a traditional thing which is kept for mostly older people, very traditional, and there are lots of protests against it. So anyway, that's Peter Singer. Bernard Rolling. Now we go into something which is not better either. Bernard Rolling is the author of a book called Animal Rights and Human Obligations. And the arguments he presents in that book are pretty much as bad as almost everything we've seen today. Okay? Let me read from his book. He says, he makes a statement in his book. He says, many and probably most people, if specifically confronted with having to choose between the life of the family dog and the life